Today we're going to talk about the power of identity. This is already our third episode of the Netskope webinar series. The first one was about the risk insights in all cloud applications. The second one was about how DLP actually can be easy. So if you missed those, make sure you're going to visit our YouTube channel of Exclusive Networks so you can check out the stuff we already presented. My name is Stefan Hof. I'm Business Development Manager at Exclusive Networks for New Technologies. And as always, I am the sidekick for our pre-sales, Cedric. So why identity? I think it's quite clear. If you look at this end-to-end report of 2022 of Mandiant, we see that a lot of the initial attack vector is based on identity, either through phishing or stolen credentials. We see that more than a third of all the attacks, that's the initial way they get inside a company. And that is why identity is key, because it's not only perimeter focused anymore. Our data is everywhere, and we talked about this a lot, but our data is everywhere. So perimeter security is not enough. We also need to talk about identity security. And one way of that identity security is also your identity in the cloud. You have to have that on-prem, but also in the cloud. Why? Because we see all of those data breaches are also present in the cloud. We are almost at a 50-50 split at this point, where all our data is already in the cloud, but our security is not. And if you look at how well are we established in the cloud, these are worldwide numbers, by the way, but we see that a lot of companies are already completely cloud or at least hybrid. So especially in Belgium, I think every company is almost hybrid mode. Why? Because we use Office 365 a lot. Everybody has SharePoint, their mails exchange online and stuff like that. That's a hybrid cloud environment. We still use some stuff on-prem, but a lot of our applications that we already using are in the cloud. So in that way, we are adopting it, a little slow, but we are adopting the cloud. A little story about this adoption rate. We are Europeans. If you look at this is an image of the first settlers who actually arrived at America at that point. These are the people who were brave enough to get inside a boat and just go for it. We Europeans are not that brave. We just don't go for it. And you see that in the numbers of the cloud adoption. These are worldwide numbers, but if you look for Europe, you're going to have to say we are mainly in the early stage. We have some cloud security, but that's really limited. If you look at a mature state on the on-prem security, we're doing very good. And we have an EDR with an XDR solution. We have great firewalls in place. We have NDR solutions, but at the cloud, we don't think we need some kind of security, and that is wrong. We need the same level of security at a cloud because our data is already there. Why is that? Well, we think it's okay, we have MFA, so our data is secure in the cloud. They're not able to reach it. Well, guess again, I hate to burst your bubble, but it's quite easy actually to bypass MFA, or at least traditional MFA. You can do MFA bombing, which is being done a lot. This is why Microsoft is gonna say, you have to fill in the token again, instead of just doing accept. And you're addressing a symptom, not a disease, because attackers are still gonna try to get you to acknowledge that or put in your code. And there are ways that attackers can do that by like MFA bombing, but also by making a copy of what looks like a legit page for logging in into your Okta account or into your Office 365 account. And in that way, they're gonna lure you to that page and they're gonna steal what we call then the authentication cookie. So the moment you put in your MFA, you're gonna log on, the attacker can steal that authentication cookie and use that to get authenticated himself. So in that way, they're gonna bypass MFA completely. And context matters. If my wife hears me talking, you're the most beautiful girl, I really love you, she's gonna be suspicious. But if I'm gonna say that to my daughter, it's okay. So that context is okay. If I'm gonna say that to a colleague, that might not be okay. So context really matters. You have to see the whole picture. And the same story is with identity and cloud identity. You need to see what happens so you can see if it's the legit authentication. Is it normal that he downloads this type of information? And we are still used to work in silos. We have different teams, we have all different type of data. We need that correlation. We did this already for on-prem, or at least we're trying to do it with the whole XDR approach. We're gonna ingest information from other silos and have the whole holistic view. Same needs to be for cloud. So that was my part, enough of me talking. Now Cedric is gonna talk about Netskope and Okta and cloud security.
Thank you very much, Stan, and hi everyone, by the way. Instead of just starting with some technical details here, I want to start with a short story. I think we have some time for that. So let me actually tell the story about Pete. Pete is a very technical guy. He's working for more than 20 years in the IT sector, and the last 6 years he works for a cybersecurity company. And he's actually a team lead. So yeah, very important people, meaning that most of the other team members will actually rely on what he's offering. And he's very dedicated. So he works a lot, and once a year, we all know you need to take vacations. So this time he actually reserved vacations to go to the US, and everything looks fine. He's at the airport 10 minutes before the flight, and then suddenly, you guessed it, someone of his team actually called him, because they are all sitting here in Belgium, all working very hard. So by the way, the guy here on the left side is not listening to some music. That's the guy who's calling Pete. And he says, like, Pete, sorry for disturbing you when you are going to vacation, but we really have a big problem. So Pete has no choice. He needs to actually take his computer. Unfortunately, he does not have his corporate computer, so he needs to use his personal device. He cannot use his 4G because he was still waiting in the airport for more than 3 hours, so he had no 4G left, and he actually needs to log into the public Wi-Fi. He managed to log into Office 365. He go to his SharePoint, download a couple of files, take some screenshots as well, and then try to actually respond to the customer with an email. And because time is pressure here, he actually sent out the email directly to the customer, and he thinks like, okay, everything is fine. Now I can go take my flight. And indeed, he takes his flight. And when he arrives at destination, suddenly again, you guessed it, he receives a call, and it is his colleague again, but this time his colleague is very mad, and he's saying, hey, look, Pete, we have a problem because you helped the customer very well. The information you provided was great, but you actually added a couple of more screenshots and documents in the attachments as well. So at this moment, we have a big problem because data has been leaked. It could be personal data of Pete. It could be intellectual property of the organization. But anyhow, your data is lost. And it's also important to keep in mind that your reputation will suffer from that, because what will your customer, what will your partners think about that? The fact that you now actually shared some intellectual property. In addition to that, keep in mind he actually logged into a public Wi-Fi, and we all know that the public Wi-Fi at the airport are not secured at all. So in this case, actually a hacker managed to perform a man-in-the-middle attack and actually grab his username and password in plain text. So today we are going to take a look at how we can address those challenges by integrating Okta with Netskope. I think we're all familiar with Netskope. Netskope does provide a full SASE solution. However, today we are going to focus on only one part, the SSE, the top of the complete SASE solution. So let's break it down and let's again focus on a specific use case. Let's focus on Pete. So Pete could be a remote user, and in this case, he's logging into an unmanaged device. And he wants to access a couple of applications, maybe just general internet, some websites, but also might be a personal or an internal application. And to do so, we actually put Netskope in the middle, and all traffic will be steered back to Netskope Intelligent SSE, so that we are now able to have complete visibility, gain that context, and then finally control what is allowed or not. So the first use case that we'll take a look at is with forward proxy, where we install the Netskope agent. So that way all traffic is properly sent or steered back to the Netskope SSE. As we saw in the previous session as well with DLP, we have a couple of solutions to actually kind of protect managed applications from unmanaged devices. And today we'll take a look at that as well, but with the integration with Okta. And also keep in mind that Netskope has a very comprehensive solution. You have a unified policy management in one console. And if we take a look at the agents, only one agent is required to actually steer all the traffic to Netskope, as well as to provide DLP. So let's break it down one more time. We have our user Pete. Pete wants to access an application, and this time we are actually putting Netskope directly inline using the Netskope agent. So the Netskope agent is installed on that endpoint, and all traffic is now steered back to the Netskope cloud. So keep in mind that the goal here is to protect both data in motion, so data that's going from the user to an application, from one application to another, or data at rest. That's typically something that you can protect using the API calls. So keep in mind, last week we actually gave a webinar regarding to DLP. Netskope DLP is very powerful, and today I will actually show you as well how to integrate some DLP policies in today's demo. But let's continue on what we saw here. So our user is now connecting to his application. It could be a private, a public application, and important is Netskope is sitting in line. So it means Netskope has complete visibility. It can gain that context, and then based on the policies you have written in your organization, you will be able to control the activities of the user. So wouldn't it be fine if we can add one top or one additional layer of security? Well, that's exactly what we are going to do. We are going to add Okta, an identity and access management solution to provide multi-factor authentication and protect our identity. So I've prepared a couple of use cases today, and I want to tackle them first. So we are going to integrate, of course, Okta with the Netskope Intelligent SSE. We're going to take a look at how we can install the Netskope agent and then enroll a user using Okta. The second use case, we'll take a look at the forward proxy. So that's a use case that we also covered in the last webinar, but this time on top of that, we'll add Okta as well. And then last, but certainly not the least, Netskope reverse proxy. Here we will be able to actually uncover unmanaged devices, but more importantly also protect our users that are connecting on these unmanaged devices. So stay tuned. We'll start with the first use case, demo 1, install the Netskope agent. So pretty straightforward. We have a device, we install the Netskope agent on that device, and then a user needs to enroll to Netskope. And usually you will provide username and password, but what if on your device there is some spyware? What if your password already has been compromised? So that's typically something you want to make sure you can protect. And today we are going to do that with Okta. With Okta, you are able to have access to all the users, your user groups that you use in your environment. And in addition to that, you'll be able to provide multi-factor authentication using Okta Verify or FIDO or another authentication method. So let's break it down. You have, of course, a couple of prerequisites. You go to Okta, you make sure that you have all your users and user groups in there, so integrated with your directory services. You must enable multi-factor authentication. So here I use the option for Okta Verify, so you can have the mobile application or the application installed on your corporate device. Then you will actually need to integrate Okta with Netskope. Therefore, you add an application integration with Netskope user enrollment that you can see at the bottom. And finally, you actually specify everything you need regarding to the SAML authentication, as well as the policy you want to, or the policy you want to write to allow certain users to use this policy and this application. So you can see that here at the bottom, simple policy that says any user that tries to access this application is allowed from any device. However, he needs to be listed under the assignment. And you will see that in a minute. If I go to assignments, I can add specific peoples or specific groups that now will have access to this application. What does that mean? Well, my user is cd@axndemo.nl and is added under this list. So if I will go install the Netskope agent, I will now be able to log in with Okta rather than just username and password. Another option with multi-factor authentication is to enable FIDO. And actually, I gave a webinar at the beginning of this week regarding to FIDO. So if you want to learn more, please make sure to take a look at that. But FIDO and FIDO2 is a really great solution. It allows passwordless authentication. It will provide very secure authentication using public key cryptography. In addition to that, it has a whole bunch of security principles and techniques to make sure that you are phishing resistant as well as man-in-the-middle attack resistant. So how does that work? Well, first of all, you need to register a security key. That security key actually has the private key, and that private key will be used to actually sign requests or sign a registration process or an authentication process. So to do so, I actually enable FIDO2 in Okta. Then I go to the user I want to enable the FIDO key, and I register the FIDO key. To register a FIDO key, it's pretty simple. You receive a pop-up that says, hey, are you sure you want to register? You click register. You provide the PIN codes of your security key, and then your security key. So by the way, if you're not familiar with FIDO, a security key looks like this. So it's very small. It looks like a small USB. And at the moment you try to actually sign an authentication or register process, well, that key will start blinking. And you will need to physically touch that key to actually sign the request. So at this point, I successfully registered my FIDO key, and I will now be able to use that to log in as multi-factor, in fact. So why is FIDO phishing resilient? Well, in fact, FIDO will take into account what server is being used, what is the application that's being used, and it will continuously verify that. So if the origin as well as the challenge and the URL that's passed from the application from the server, if they are different, well, the server knows there's a man in the middle attack. It is phishing resistant because you have the security key that's sitting on your key, and that key is of course a physical key. A hacker cannot have access to that physical key. If you might think, okay, what happens if you clone that key? Well, if you clone that key, there is a built-in counter, and that counter will be used to actually detect that a clone is being used. So you can see a very secure and efficient way to protect your identity. So let's now move on to the installation process of the Netskope agent. Pretty straightforward. We download the agent, next, finish. So it's really simple. And then we need to provide the Netskope tenant name as well as the domain. So you can see here, make sure that you provide the correct name of your tenant, and then of course the right domain. So in my case, it is au.goscope, and do not write axn-benelux.eu. That won't work. So let's take a look at how that looks in action. So we provide the domain name. As I mentioned, make sure to have the correct domain name and specify the correct region of your Goscope tenant. And then you will actually be redirected to the authentication page. So usually here you will have standard username and password, but this time you might be familiar with this screen. This is the authentication page of Okta. So we now need to log into Okta with our corporate account. We of course provide our password. That's our first authentication method. And then we can see here that we actually need to provide our second factor authentication. And it's asking me to provide my security key. I'm also able to go to the standard option, which is a push notification using Okta Verify. So I received the pop-up. I need to unlock my security key with my PIN. And then I receive a pop-up that says, please touch your key physically to complete the authentication, or in this case, the enrollment process. And we can see it is successfully. So we are now logged in, and our Netskope agent is successfully enrolled. So hopefully you saw how easy it is. It is very secure, and in less than 1 minute, we actually provide a secure way to authenticate to Netskope clients. Okay, let's go to the most important and most interesting part, I think, the forward proxy and the reverse proxy. So with the forward proxy, we saw in the previous session, we have a corporate device with the Netskope agent and a specific user that tries to access a web application, a SaaS application. It might be a public or a private application, doesn't matter. Netskope will sit in line, so all traffic is steered to the Netskope cloud, and we will use the forward proxy capabilities. However, this time we are adding once again an additional layer of security. We'll integrate with Okta to enforce multi-factor authentication. So let's take a look at that, and let's start with the policy I have used to demonstrate that. So here I specified a specific user as well as the destination being Microsoft applications, cloud applications, of course. And then under profile and action, you can see I specify the action as being multi-factor authentication. This means that when a user tries to log into Office 365, he will provide username and password. If you have configured it with Okta, you will be once again redirected to the Okta login page. And once you are logged into Office 365, you will actually be able to access all the other applications, such as SharePoint, such as Outlook, whatever. But because we have a policy here that says, hey, look, you need to provide multi-factor authentication on a specific activity. What is that activity? Well, if you try to delete an email, or if you try to delete a file on SharePoint, on any Microsoft application running in the cloud, well, then you receive a pop-up that says, hey, look, you need to provide multi-factor authentication. And once again, you will be able to specify with Okta if you want to use the push notification using Okta Verify, or if you want to use your FIDO security key or another authentication method. And then that's very important as well. Everything inside Netskope, all activities is properly monitored. So we can see here that our user cd at xndemo.nl is actually trying to access a Microsoft application and that he tries to delete a certain file. And that is, of course, being blocked unless the user provides multi-factor authentication. Let's take a look at another example here. So here we are actually blocking the activity upload. And in addition to that, we are combining that with a DLP profile, as we saw in the previous session, just to show you how you can integrate both. And then, of course, the action here, upload. But you can see at the bottom, we have an action on the profile and actions. And this time, it's also set to multi-factor. This means that if I try to upload a file that contains some sensitive information, once again, I will be actually triggered to perform that multi-factor authentication. So the policy looks like this. It is a real-time policy, by the way, because forward proxy is a real-time policy. We are sitting in line and we can react in line directly. So the user will receive that nice pop-up and we are able to control the activities of a user. Another example here, just to show you a kind of a pretty nice application category that has been added. So I just want to show you that this time I specify once again specific user. And here, rather than specifying an application, I will use an application category. And I will actually go for all applications that are using generative AI. And the action will once again be enforcement of multi-factor authentication. So if we take a look at that in action, if I try to search for ChatGPT, fine, it works. But at the moment I try to use ChatGPT, once again, I receive this multi-factor authentication pop-up. And if I click OK, I will once again need to provide my MFA with Okta. Another example, hopefully you know that from the previous session as well, but you have whole kind of actions that are possible. So we have allow, block, multi-factor, and then also a very nice one is the coach or the user coach action. And this time we are, rather than providing MFA or blocking the page completely, we provide a nice pop-up that says, hey, look, user, you are taking a lot of risk here. Please stop the activity you are doing or accept the risk and continue. So pretty nice to see that Netskope has actually added that generative AI category. And then last but certainly not the least, we'll take a look at reverse proxy. This might be the most important one because we saw in the previous session as well, we can use the CASB and the API functionalities of Netskope, where we are kind of protecting our managed cloud applications. But this time we go much more further, because imagine you are sitting at home on an unmanaged device, on your personal device, and you are trying to log into Office 365. Well, if your Office 365 is now linked with Okta, so you need to authenticate through Okta before you can access the application, well, you can configure Okta and Netskope with reverse proxy so that all traffic will be steered back to the Netskope cloud. So Okta sends traffic back to Netskope. Netskope receives that traffic in reverse proxy. From the reverse proxy, it will go to the authentication proxy. And that way, Netskope is able to actually authenticate and identify the user that's being used. So let's take a look at that in action. So this time, instead of specifying simply a user, I will specify the access method as being reverse proxy. So anyone that's trying to log in through the reverse proxy will actually hit this policy. And this policy at this point is very simple, says, hey, look, if you try to access any Microsoft application, you will be blocked. And then, of course, if you're familiar with Netskope, if you do create a new policy, you always need to actually apply to confirm that change to avoid problems in production environment. So now that our policy is active, let's try to log in from an unmanaged device. So unmanaged device means that there is no Netskope agent running on this particular device. And just take a look or take a moment at the URL at the bottom of this demo. So we can see that this time we are redirected to a proxy XM Benelux, and we receive the authentication page of Okta that we all know. Okay, so we will try to log in through Okta. And again, take a look at this link, because you will see that we will be actually redirected to the Netskope reverse proxy. So this time you can see that I received the option for push notification. So I unlock my device, my mobile device. I accept the notification. And then, as you can see at the top, the URL will change. We now go to loginmicrosoft.com, but take a look at what it's at the end, .rpproxyGoScope.com. So we are actually passing through the reverse proxy of Netskope. If you also take a look at the certificate now, you will see that it is actually signed by a Netskope. So even unmanaged devices that do not have a Netskope agent, we are able to control and monitor all those activities. So just to show you the difference between the policies, rather than just specifying a user or saying access method is forward proxy, we now specify the access method as being a reverse proxy. And then of course, we are able to protect any unmanaged user. And then last but not least, as I mentioned previously, Netskope is always providing you nice logs and monitoring. So we can see here that we have a couple of alerts that have been generated as well. So if I go through those alerts, we can see that a specific user that tried to log in from a Windows 11 device has actually been blocked when he tries to delete a certain file on Microsoft Office 365. Okay, guys, that's it. That's where the 3 use cases I had prepared for you. If there are any questions at this point, please make sure that you put them in the chat. And otherwise, I will give the word back to Stan.
All right, thank you, Cedric. Let's take a look at the questions. So I got a question here regarding the possibilities, even in reverse proxy, of what can you do in SaaS applications? Because, yeah, okay, I think I understand the question. So we saw the example that Cedric gave you. If you use ChatGPT, you can get like the blog page or the alert page, but it can also be used in, yeah, almost every SaaS application out there, right? Salesforce or whatever they're gonna use online. So for example, if you want to download a whole list of customers, yeah, that could be based on behavior, that could be suspicious, and then we can trigger an MFA or do a block or whatever you want to do at your policy. Because, yeah, can you tell something about the behavior part of Netskope, what they can do?
Yeah, for sure. I just want to add something that might be important as well. It really depends on what application you're trying to access, because it's not like every application is allowing the same activities, allowing the same user experience. So you need to make sure that you first identify what application. For instance, Google Drive. Yeah, you can of course upload some files, you can share some files, but not all applications will have those activities. So it basically means that you cannot enforce for all applications the same activities. So some applications in Netskope, for instance, won't be able to provide multi-factor, because if that application does not support multi-factor, hopefully it makes sense that you cannot enforce MFA. So is that answering your question? And yes, indeed, if we take a look at the user behavior, for instance, as we know, Netskope is using a kind of score system going from 0 to 1,000. And then you can actually take a look at all kind of misbehaving, kind of changes in the baseline of the user. And then, of course, you will have additional scores that will be added. And then let's say that the score is going from 0 to 100. Well, we'll be able to actually restrict access using our policies.
So, okay, I think that answers the question. So, okay, guys, thank you for joining us. If you have any more questions, please do reach out. We wish you a wonderful summer, and we're gonna take a break from the webinars for a short term and be back later this year. All right, so thank you very much, and see you later.